Hi, everyone. For those who are just joining us, we're about to get started with the webinar today. We're just going to wait for a few more seconds to let people join in. Welcome. It's great to see some very familiar names in the chat. Hi, everybody. It's good to see you all. Great. I see a lot of people still joining. Good morning from Calgary. Hello, good morning, Calgary. It must be very, very early for you there. Welcome, everyone. So glad that you could join. All right, we're going to get started. We're recording this session today, so in case you missed the beginning of it, you'll be able to go back and take another look through. Please let me give you a very warm welcome to everyone who's joining us today. My name is Liz Mullen-Bernhardt. I'm the coordinator of the Global Adaptation Network. And on behalf of the UN Environment Program, it's my pleasure to welcome you to the first ever GAN webinar. And we've chosen two areas of our work to dive into today, which is our work in National Adaptation Plans, or NAPs for short, and the role of ecosystem-based adaptation, also known as EBA. Increasingly, we're seeing these two areas of our work dovetail, along with a rising interest in nature-based solutions in general, in particular for adaptation. And judging by the level of participation in this webinar, I can tell that you share our interest and passion for this work. Now, we did hit capacity very quickly for this webinar, and we're way overbooked for today. So whether you're joining us live or catching us afterwards in a recording, we're glad that you're tuning in, and we look forward to exchanging information with you today and in the future. I'm going to start off by giving you a very quick overview of what you're going to hear about today over the next hour. First, I'll give you a brief introduction to UNEP's mandate and our work in adaptation, including the GAN. Then my intrepid colleague, Alex Forbes, will be providing an overview and insights from UNEP's experience working in countries on both EBA and NAPs. After that, it will be my pleasure to welcome one of our partner colleagues, Annika Turton of the NAP Global Network, IISD, to present a very interesting analysis that they've done on EBA in existing NAPs. And finally, we've invited our consultant, Alejandro Jimenez, to help us present our ongoing work on developing guidelines for countries to integrate EBA into their NAPs, which we're conducting as part of the Global Support Program to NAPs, or the NAP GSP. In between, we've got some questions and quizzes prepared for you just to keep you on your toes and to gather some feedback on your work in NAPs. And we'll be doing our best to have time for questions and answers at the end. In the meantime, we'd like to ask you to put any questions you might have into the chat box, along with the person you'd like to address them to, so that we can get to them when possible. As mentioned, this is our first webinar, so we do ask for your patience. If you see any technical glitches, I assure you they're entirely my fault and not at all to be blamed on our amazing communications officer, Marcus Neild, who is the silent and invisible engine behind this webinar today. So if anything goes wrong, just blame me. Firstly, as mentioned, I'd like to tell you a bit about UNEP's scope of work and mandate and adaptation. This may be our first webinar, but it's most our first trip around the adaptation block. And for the past 10 years, UN member states have asked us to help them accelerate their meeting of climate commitments, in particular, of course, those in the Paris Agreement, which includes the development of national adaptation plans. Countries have also asked us to help them increase their capacity to access and scale up climate finance and technology. Now, all of in this area have grown steadily over the past 10 years. And in my colleague Alex's presentation, you'll see that we are now supporting a significant number of countries in both NAPS and EBA. And we do so primarily through 2 channels. The Global Support Program for NAPS, known as the NAP GSP, which is a GEF-funded program co-implemented by the UN Development Program and UNEP, which has components for both LDCs and non-LDCs, with one outcome being the development of the EBA guidelines for NAPS that you're going to hear more about today. And in addition, we offer direct support through one-on-one country projects. And you'll hear more about that from Alex in just a few minutes. Now, drawing upon that experience across our house, including the work we're doing on the ground, UNEP also has a mandate to expand the evidence base for adaptation, especially ecosystem-based approaches, and to share that knowledge through partnerships such as what we're doing here today through the GAN. Hopefully, you're already familiar with some of UNEP's normative work on adaptation, such as the Adaptation Gap Report, the newest edition of which we're launching next month. We also have a sizable body of knowledge on nature-based solutions, including fact sheets and briefing notes, animations on EBA. So I invite you to visit our landing page for more information, and I'll be sharing that link with you at the end of our webinar. And finally, we create policy briefs and guidelines such as the ones we're presenting on today for NAPS. And ultimately, our aim is to promote that sharing of knowledge and the increased uptake and political momentum around adaptation, in particular, nature-based solutions for adaptation. Finally, I just want to give a very quick word and a shout out to GAN and our partners. Since 2010, we've existed as a worldwide platform to distribute and exchange climate adaptation knowledge, which brings together the regional networks that you can see here on your screen. So you may already be familiar with the APAN, for example, in Asia Pacific, or Regatta in Latin America. These are all part of the GAN family. And in addition, we also have a number of other global partners and initiatives, some of which you can see here on the right-hand side of the screen. Now, with that introduction, I'm about to pass over to my colleague, Alex Forbes, to talk more in depth on how and where and why UNEP works on adaptation. But first, I'm going to be asking all of you who are tuned in right now to answer the first of 2 Menti questions that we have prepared for you, 2 Menti surveys. My colleague, Marcus, is sharing his screen so that you can see it up on your screen now. And I'm going to invite all of you to please go to www.menti.com and enter the code that you can see here on the screen, which is 2745509. Now, the first question you should see on your screen, and I'll give you a minute just to navigate over to menti.com and enter that code. And the first question you should see on your screen is, if you work in adaptation, which country or countries do you work in? And here you can add up to 3 answers. And we'd really like to know where your work is concentrated and taking place so that we can get a sense of who's in the room. And the more people answer a certain country, the bigger it will get. So I can see Haiti seems, for example, to have a few people responding. That's great. And a lot of people saying global. I knew that that would happen. Fantastic. We've got Bangladesh, Ireland, Thailand, Mozambique, South Sudan, Canada, Cameroon, Philippines. Fantastic. Nepal and Haiti are coming up as bigger than the others, so we obviously have several people working in those countries. South Africa, Myanmar, Sao Tome and Principe. This is really fun to watch. It's like artwork happening just in front of my eyes. And really, a really interesting range we've got. I see Central Asia, I see Africa, I see Latin America, I see all over Africa. Fantastic. Great. We've got a lot of people in the webinar today, so I could see it might take a few minutes for everyone to respond. Please continue to do so. And lots of people answering global. All right. Fantastic. Djibouti, several answers there. Panama. Okay, some people are putting in entire regions, I see. Latin America. Fantastic. Thank you so much. Seems that we're slowing down. I feel like it's a bag of popcorn in a microwave that I'm trying to wait for the kernels to stop popping, but it looks like we're slowing down. Thank you so much for that. I'll just give you another second or two to put in your response. Great. Lots of different countries we're working in. Fantastic. What a great range. Wonderful. All right, Marcus, I'm going to ask if you can advance to the next question in the Menti. And this is really meant to give us a bit of an understanding of what type of organization you work for. So we know which countries you're working in, but what kind of organization are you working for? And the answers we have here are academia, government, NGO, international organization, private sector, or other. Hopefully, we have very few people answering other, but there could be some others in the room right now. Great, so lots of people from international organizations. All right, let's see, I'm going to give you also a few minutes here just to respond. Several from academia, very interesting. Excellent. I think you'll find that no matter what your interest is in NAPs or which country you work in, that the information you get today in the webinar should hopefully be interesting for you from a number of different perspectives. Great. I'm going to give you a few more minutes to respond. It's www.menti.com, and the code you can see at the top of the screen, 2745509. And it seems like we've slowed down in our responses. A lot of international organizations, so welcome to my fellow colleagues. Fantastic to have you all here. We've got one NGO that just came onto the scene. Welcome. Great. All right, I think that we're almost slowing down a bit now in those responses. So Marcus, I'm going to ask if we can jump to the third question and final question that we have for now in the Menti. We'll have two more questions later on. The last question is, what is the extent of your involvement in NAPs? And here you've got three different responses that you can give. You might not work in NAPs. That is fine. You are still welcome, but we'd like to hear from you. You may not yet be working in NAPs, but will be working on them in the imminent future, and you could give that as a response as well. You may also be in the process of creating a NAP or have already created a NAP, already been involved in that process. And if so, we'd like to hear from you as well. This is great because I see we have a lot of people answering that they're in the middle of creating a NAP. I think that this will be particularly interesting for you, what we're going to hear about in the webinar. However, even if you've already created a NAP, it is, of course, a long-term and an iterative process. So obviously, these steps that you hear about today and the information you get should be interesting for you in the future as well. Fantastic. I'm just going to give another few seconds for people to respond. Quite a few people saying they don't work in NAPs. That's interesting. And our largest segment of responses is that you currently don't work in NAPs, but you will be in the future. That is particularly interesting. Hopefully, you'll be able to consider EBA and to integrate it from the very beginning. That's the right way to do it. Fantastic. That's our biggest segment. Wonderful. All right. Excellent. Thank you so much to all of you for your responses in the Menti. I always find those fun and interesting to see who's in the room with us. So with that, I'm going to be handing back over to myself so that I can share my screen with you. And hopefully you can all see the presentation again. I would now like to hand over to my colleague Alex Forbes, based in Nairobi. Alex is a Program Management Officer in UNEP's Climate Change Adaptation Unit, and he's going to be providing us with an overview of UNEP's current work in EBA and NAPS. Alex, over to you.
Thank you, Liz, for the introduction. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to all colleagues on the line. It's a pleasure for me to give a quick overview of UNEP's work in EBA and NAPS. UNEP's portfolio of ecosystem-based projects are focused on the use of biodiversity and ecosystem services to help people adapt to the adverse effects of climate change. Ecosystems such as rivers, forests, lakes provide important regulatory and provisioning services which support agriculture, fisheries, and other production systems on which livelihoods and society are dependent. The ongoing loss and degradation of ecosystems is compounded with the risks and impact of climate change in the short, medium, and long term. The aim of EBA is to safeguard and restore ecosystems so that their vital services mitigate the impacts of climate change and extreme weather events now and in the future. In doing so, help people and society to increase their resilience to a changing climate. Next slide. Our UNEP portfolio comprises of over 50 EBA projects across 5 regions, supporting member states to pilot EBA approaches. We're funding from the GEF Least Developed Country Fund, the Adaptation Fund, as well as the Green Climate Fund. The combined targets include restoring a total of 113,000 hectares of land and benefiting around 2.5 million people. Next slide. Examples of our projects include coastal restoration in the Seychelles through planting of mangroves and climate resilient grasses in Albania to protect coastlines against projected increase in storms and rising sea levels. Supporting livelihoods that are dependent on the ecosystem services is central to the approach. Other examples relate to reforestation and afforestation of water catchment areas as part of an integrated water resource management framework, using climate-resilient tree species, including also agroforestry approaches, for example, in Cambodia and also in other countries such as Comoros. And similar approaches are applied in drier biomes in other countries such as Gambia or Sudan. Increasingly, we support the analysis of EBA results in terms of ecosystem restoration and livelihood benefits, and will focus on undertaking economic assessments to demonstrate net benefits of ecosystem approaches. Generating this evidence is critical to promote EBA upscaling and replication through integration in local and national adaptation and development planning processes. As is the case for a number of our projects, EBA is often implemented in area-specific locations. In line with EBA being part of an overall adaptation and development strategy, project activities and outputs feature as part of local development plans and sector planning processes. With increasing evidence of tried and tested successful EBA initiatives, attention is placed on integrating EBA approaches into national, subnational, and sectoral policies and processes. It's important for sustaining EBA and upscaling the wider application of EBA across sectors, for instance, in agriculture, water resource management, as well as other regions. Next slide. National Adaptation Planning processes, or commonly known as NAP processes, are a vehicle for supporting the upscaling and wider replication of EBA approaches. To date, UNEP is supporting 18 governments to advance their national adaptation planning processes with financing from the Green Climate Fund and the LDCF. We also have a number of proposals in their pipelines. Furthermore, in collaboration with UNDP, we are implementing the NAP Global Support Program that Liz has explained. And we are also a member of the UNFCCC LEG Technical Working Group on NAPs. And I would invite participants to visit the UNFCCC website, the NAP Central, which has a lot of information that's available on the NAP process. Our focus in UNEP, in line with this guidance from the UNFCCC, includes strengthening capacities at national level and subnational level at 2 levels. First, to engage across sectoral integrated institutional frameworks. Second, to generate information on adaptation planning. For example, generate downscaled climate change projections and scenarios to inform climate risk assessments, with a particular focus on ecosystems and ecosystem variables and their links to livelihoods and economy. Another area of focus is supporting the NAP lead agency to engage in a consultative process with all key stakeholders. This should include ministries of planning and finance, local government, sector ministries, agriculture, infrastructure and others, civil society partners, academia and private sector. Another focus is conducting economic appraisal of adaptation options for prioritization and inclusion in the NAP, and also guiding the integration of adaptation priorities into national and subnational development plans, policies, and implementation mechanisms. Next slide. Linking EBA and NAPs offers a win-win situation. I mentioned that EBA upscaling can be achieved through inclusion of EBA in the NAPs. Similarly, EBA approach offers a number of positive elements, and I would like to highlight 5. First one is our natural environment, our ecosystems, our biodiversity, offer our first and most important asset for adapting to climate change. This was a clear message from our UN Secretary General yesterday in his speech on the state of the planet. EBA helps to foster the adoption of nature-based solutions for adaptation. Think of mangrove forests in terms of effectiveness to protect coastlines against storms and rising sea levels, but also providing other important additional services in terms of supporting marine and coastal fauna. Therefore, the inclusion of EBA in the NAP process serves to also help countries to contribute towards achieving other important environmental commitments, including the CBD on biodiversity, the Sendai framework on disaster risk reduction, and others. The forthcoming UN Decade on Ecosystem Restoration will also be a catalyst to help promote EBA integration into NAPs. EBA can provide local level evidence of adaptation benefits to inform the NAP process. For example, in Sudan, the NAP was prepared in 2016. In 2018, UNEP, with the Higher Council for Environment and Natural Resources of Sudan, is supporting, or since 2018, is supporting clusters of communities in White Nile State to safeguard and restore rangelands and forest land within an integrated watershed program. This is in context of supporting the implementation of the NAP in White Nile State, but also the intention is to draw on the achievements and lessons learned of EBA to help inform the next cycle of the NAP. Therefore, NAPs can be contributing to the formulation as well as offer a strategy for the implementation of the NAP. Drawing on EBA approaches also contribute to broadening the range of stakeholders involved in the elaboration, implementation, and monitoring of the NAP process. Since EBA's initiatives are often locally focused, it enables local stakeholders, landowners, land owners, those affected by climate change, local government administrators, local private sector operators, to contribute their experiences and perspectives to the NAP elaboration, and implementation. This enriches the NAP process, which otherwise can be risked to be dominated by national level stakeholders. Next slide. Effective EBA often requires a cross-sectoral approach involving coordinated actions with more than one sector. Inclusion of EBA in the NAP process will promote a horizontal cross-sectoral approach. Similarly, it also promotes a vertical integration of adaptation actions from the national level to the local level and vice versa. Conversely, the vertical integration is supplemented with EBA informing local level land use planning and the connection of local level land use planning up district and higher. Next slide. Sorry. Go back. Lastly, 5 is EBA inclusion in the NAP process also offers potential for mobilizing funds to support implementation of adaptation measures. For instance, inclusion of payment for ecosystem services can help be channeled at local level to support implementation, as well as accessing local government budget financing to support implementation at local level of adaptation activities. So lastly, I would say that our work supporting the NAP process benefits from the work done by national institutions who have progressed in recent years in their NAPs and have completed NAPs. We also acknowledge and draw on the guidance and support provided by the UNFCCC NAP Central, as well as documentations and guidance prepared by the NAP Working Group of the UNFCCC, and the partners who are engaged in this, such as fellow UN agencies, FAO, UNDP, and others, and other member institutions of the GAN, so international groups and others. So I'd like to end there and thank you for your attention. Liz, back to you.
Thank you so much, Alex, for that very informative overview of our work and the projects that you and others in the Climate Change Adaptation Unit are involved in supporting. We will not have time at this moment for questions and answers, but I invite all of you who have questions for Alex or about our work in EBA or NAPs in general to please kindly enter it into the chat box now. We'll try to get to it in the course of this webinar, but in case we don't manage to get to all of your questions during the webinar itself, you'll have information about how to reach out to us at the end of this webinar. I'm now going to hand over to my colleague Annika Turton at the NAP Global Network at IISD to give us an overview of the analysis they've done so far on EBA and NAPs. Annie, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Liz. Good morning to everyone. It's early here in Canada, and good afternoon to the rest of the world, or good evening. Thanks so much for UN Environment and the Global Adaptation Network for putting on this webinar. We're really delighted to partner with you on this. And I'm super excited that we can now share with you the final results of an analysis that the NAP Global Network has undertaken to gain a better understanding of the extent to which ecosystem-based adaptation is actually being used as a tool for adaptation in the NAP processes that have been not completed, but the NAP documents that have been published and made available. So in this review, we looked at 19 NAP documents, which are from 6 countries in Latin America, 7 countries in Africa and the Middle East, 2 from the Pacific, 1 from Asia, and 3 from the Caribbean. And this analysis, I will really touch on it in my short presentation, but it's now available online on our website. Next slide, please. Before that, though, just in case you have not heard about the NAP Global Network, I just wanted to quickly share with you what we do. And our overarching goal is, of course, to enhance national adaptation planning and action in developing countries. And we've been around for over 5 years now. in which we have provided technical assistance to over 42 countries. We have trained 4,800 people on climate change adaptation, and we've strengthened capacity in adaptation of over 270 government institutions. So we mainly focus on peer-to-peer learning and facilitating that between countries. We provide technical assistance to countries. It's usually either short or long term on different aspects of NAP planning and implementation. And another area of our work also is focused on enhancing bilateral support for countries on the NAP. Next slide, please. And with that, let me just get right into the analysis I just touched on. So why did we do this analysis? We know that EBA has emerged as a successful tool for adaptation. I think the previous presentation was really good evidence of that. And we also collected many case studies, and we have evidence and proof that EBA can help communities to build resilience and help them to adapt and build their adaptive capacity. However, we also know that EBA, for it to be successful, should be mainstream and be part of an overall adaptation strategy or plan such as the NAP. And we also know that we have 125 countries now, as of last week, I believe, that have started their NAP process and that are at various stages in their NAP process, which provides a really important opportunity here to look at what has been done already in NAP processes and what can we learn from it, and potentially what is the role of EBA in these published NAP documents, and what are opportunities to strengthen the expansion and the quality of EBA in ongoing NAP processes, if at all. Next slide, please. So I will only highlight some of the most interesting findings in my presentation, and then move very quickly into some opportunities that we've identified where EBA in NAPs can be strengthened. And I think it would be most useful for the remainder of our conversation. And so in terms of important key findings, I'm going to start with the very encouraging ones that we found from our analysis, and the promising ones in terms of mainstreaming efforts of EBA, followed then by some of the opportunities we see where we can strengthen the inclusion of EBA in NAPs. So doing our review, we saw that all NAP documents submitted made an effort to integrate the consideration of ecosystems, and they identified ecosystem services. What was a little bit in terms of ecosystem services, we found that sometimes the contribution that ecosystem services make in terms of societal benefits or economic benefits, they're sometimes only implied or not very explicit, or are more discussed in generic terms. And nonetheless, this is a very positive thing because it shows the importance of ecosystems in the consideration in NAPs. We also found that the vulnerabilities of the natural environment and ecosystems to climate change were very well covered in many NAPs, as well as causes of other degradation to ecosystems. And the understanding of how climate change and human degradation, caused degradation, can interact with each other. And that was all covered very well in the impact on ecosystem services in NAPs. We also found that most countries included EBA measures to reduce the threats and the vulnerabilities of ecosystems they identified in their NAP. And last but not least, there is evidence that countries are starting to link the NAP process and ecosystems to other relevant national strategies and global agendas. So really recognizing the co-benefits that EBA measures have for sustainable development, for climate change mitigation, for disaster risk reduction, and also like more like other global agendas like the upcoming biodiversity global framework. Next slide, please. And then on the other hand, we found that there were some areas where efforts could be strengthened, and this is really about ensuring the effectiveness of EBA outcomes. So for example, we found that within NAP documents, forests were the ecosystems most identified as vulnerable to climate change, along with freshwater and coastal marine. And they also had the most corresponding EBA measures related to these ecosystems. But as a result of that, we saw that mountain ecosystems, grasslands, deserts were quite underrepresented in many NAPs, which we don't know exactly why that is. It could be because many of them are transboundary ecosystems, or because of the history of REDD, for example. But that's one observation that where we feel there are a lot of other ecosystems that need to be captured in NAPs to cover the diversity of ecosystems we have. And we also noticed that the identification of financial resources for EBA and ecosystems and the engagement of the private sector is not necessarily widespread in NAPs, but that's something that doesn't just apply to EBA, but also to other adaptation options. We also noted that NAPs tend to identify people and groups that are particularly vulnerable to climate change and may benefit from adaptation actions, but really only a few of them made a direct connection to ecosystem-based actions and which particular groups would benefit specifically from EBA or are particularly vulnerable because of degradation of ecosystems. We also found that the efforts to monitor EBA outcomes is still very limited. Some countries have identified partial or full time-bound measurable targets for the EBA measures. But again, this isn't just something that's related to EBA, but also to the range of adaptation actions and options that are usually covered in NAPs. And last, which was a little bit of a surprise, that we found that urban EBA and gray-green hybrid options were actually very underrepresented in the NAPs, even though we feel there has been a lot of increased attention, especially in the aspects of urban or human settlements and specific guidance around that in recent publications. But yeah, there is still a lot of room to also look at engaging more in the conversation, not gray versus green, but like a hybrid combination between the two of them and how they can be included in adaptation options as part of NAPs. Next slide, please. And so it's important to note that the review clearly shows that vulnerability of people and ecosystems is a serious concern for countries, and many countries are striving for adaptation actions that will protect both in a changing climate. It also further illustrated that the importance of ecosystems and EBA in adaptation strategies. Countries that have submitted and finalized their NAPs, that there's some opportunity to strengthen the quality and quantity of EBA, as we called it. And I just want to quickly go through some of the opportunities we see where we can strengthen EBA in NAPs, especially for countries that are in their process of currently planning their NAP and developing adaptation options. So important, I think it is that we adopt the notion that our economies and well-being are embedded in and rely on healthy ecosystems. I think countries are already recognizing the degradation and vulnerabilities of ecosystems, but to really accelerate the sustainable transition, I think NAPs really have an opportunity to emphasize and communicate the important role of the provision of ecosystem services for our economies in a positive way. We know ecosystems are vulnerable and are facing large impacts from climate change, but we also need to recognize the amazing opportunities that and the reliance we see in them in order to, and the opportunities they provide for adaptation. I think that the NAP process is an important opportunity to advance the protection of biodiversity and advance the linkages with climate adaptation. So we've seen that already, but NAPs can be used, especially now with the momentum we have, to reflect really the urgency of the biodiversity crisis as well, and further embrace the interdependence between climate change and biodiversity loss, because we always hear EBA are win-win solutions, and I think that's something that could be even stronger reiterated in ongoing NAP processes, and to really facilitate also the integration of adaptation into biodiversity policies and conservation programs. And then considering and integrating EBA solutions across all sectors is something that is still a missed opportunity, because we found that EBA solutions are we find them in the traditional conservation-like sectors like water, biodiversity or conservation, but not necessarily in sectors like non-traditional ones like urban settings, infrastructure, health, or energy, that could greatly benefit from cultivating these EBA solutions and can deliver multiple benefits. So because of the cross-natural nature of the NAP process, there's a lot more opportunity to engage non-traditional sectors that may not think about EBA options, but to actually promote and integrate more EBA solutions and options during the process of developing adaptation options. We also found an opportunity could be to apply effectiveness criteria to ensure that EBA solutions deliver intended outcomes. So that was a big finding for us, that we did find a lot of actions, and we did consider them EBA because they are part of an adaptation plan. So we figured that countries consider them adaptation options. But so much work has gone into effectiveness criteria over the last few years in EBA to ensure that these actions deliver outcomes for people and ecosystems. And we found that often actions that we may consider EBA were more traditional business as usual conservation measures. So in order to really achieve the intended adaptation outcomes, it would be helpful to use or apply some of the effectiveness criteria that have been developed by different organizations in the process of when adaptation options are considered and developed. And then the two last things really, there's still more opportunity to strengthen the targets and the monitoring and evaluation of EBA options. This is really important because we need to capture the evidence and also the performance of EBA solutions, and to build more confidence, and also obviously support the uptake of EBA. So more can be done in improving monitoring and evaluation of EBA solutions. And of course, this is, as I mentioned earlier, not necessarily just to EBA, but the identification of potential financial resources and collaboration with the private sector is an important piece of the resource puzzle in the NAP process during the planning stage, to really ensure that implementation is actually taking place and can be strengthened. And even in addition, engaging in identifying potential private sector activities as part of the NAP, such as in utilities and agriculture and forestry, could really support increased engagement on that side. Next slide, please. And with that, I just wanted to direct you to our website, where you can find the analysis, which is a lot more detailed than what I just provided you with. And there's a table of it as well, and some graphics. And yeah, you find the analysis on our website, www.nappluralnetwork.org. And with that, last slide, please. I just wanted to say thank you for having me and for sharing the results of the analysis with you. And I'm happy to answer any questions you may have now, or feel free to reach out to me as well. Back to you, Liz.
Thank you so much, Annie, for that excellent overview. I look forward to seeing how your work continues. We have, from what I heard from you, more than 125 other NAPs that are currently potentially underway. So hopefully you'll be expanding this work to look at an analysis of that as well. I'm mindful of the time, and I see that we have a few questions in our chat. I think we can take one or two now, but otherwise I will recommend that you kindly add your question to the chat. We can try to get to it after this webinar. We will also be showing you and telling you how you can get in touch with us to continue the conversation after the webinar as well. So let me just go to our chat and take a quick look at some of the questions that we have. Annie, it's great that you mentioned monitoring and evaluation and how to track progress on EBA, and that really matches well with one of the questions we have in our audience. His or her name, is Kadu. I don't see which country you're from, but the question is, are countries adopting indicators in their NAPs to measure progress for EBA? So maybe you can say something about that, Annie.
Yes, so it's really, it came down to really a small handful of NAPs that we identified where we found well-developed indicators, roles and responsibilities of people, actually like a specific department, a specific ministry that will be responsible for measuring the progress and following up and collecting the information. And again, it's not just an EBA issue, but also across other adaptation options. But what I should have mentioned, we also know that many countries may have developed a NAP document and then they develop a separate strategy for monitoring and evaluation. So even though I'm saying we didn't find a lot of that information in existing NAP documents, we would have to, I think, go a step further and look at countries that may have developed an additional monitoring and evaluation strategy where they actually started to think more systematically about specific indicators for the EBA solutions they've identified, as well as how they're going to measure progress and the specific responsibilities. So in the NAP documents itself, it's quite limited to very specific countries. Many of, like, for example, Brazil has a very long NAP document, and the shorter ones maybe are the ones where you will see more additional separate strategies that they develop, and then they cover those kind of aspects in separate documents.
Great, thank you so much for that. We really look forward to that analysis that you've done, and also the discussion of opportunities that you've mentioned and some of the barriers to bringing EBA into NAPs. We look forward to feeding that into the guidelines that we're currently developing on using EBA for NAPs. And with that, I'm going to be segging, unfortunately, into our last section of our webinar. I'm mindful of the time. I do invite you, please keep the conversation going with us. Reach out after the webinar. For those joining us live now or who are watching the recording of this webinar later on, we welcome you to reach out to us. Thank you so much to my colleague Annika for that presentation. For the last section of our webinar today, it's my pleasure to invite our colleague Alejandro Jimenez to give an overview of the guidelines we're currently creating through the NAP GSP, which aim to help countries integrate EBA into their NAPs. Before we begin with that presentation, I'm going to direct you towards the second and the last Menti that we've created for you today. There are two more questions that we have to ask you. So for those of you who have not yet logged into Menti, I'd like to invite you to please go now to www.menti.com and enter the code 2745509. And you should be able to see the next question on your screen, which is, at what stage is the NAP process in your country? And here you have several options that you can give. Not yet started or not started, in the planning and preparation stage, in the implementation stage, at the monitoring and review stage, or having already completed a NAP. And I'll just give you a few seconds here to enter your response. Ideally, this would relate to the countries that you mentioned you're working in at the beginning, at the first Menti question. All right, so I see quite a number of you are at the planning and preparation stage, meaning that you're not yet, you're just at the beginning, really, of the NAP process. But it's fantastic that you're joining the webinar now and interested in these topics so you can see how to bring in EBA into the process. I'm going to give just a few more seconds for people to respond on this question. either people are not paying attention or not many of you are working in NAPs, but I see that we don't have a huge amount of response on the question. So please, if you are working in NAPs or you know about the NAP process in your country, we welcome you to respond now. Great. So I see more responses coming in. We have most people in the planning and preparation phase or in the implementation phase. Fantastic. So you're really right in the middle of that NAP process. Great. Please now, I invite the rest of you to take a second to provide your response now, and otherwise we'll be moving on to the last question we have today. I see some numbers still going up. The last question we have for you is the involvement of EBA in your NAP so far. We'd like to hear from you for those who are involved or countries that are involved in a NAP. How much are you already considering EBA? And here you have a couple of options to choose from once again. So it may be that you are already including EBA in the NAP process, and that's great. It could be that you are interested in doing so, but have not yet done so. Or it could be that you are not yet or not considering EBA in the NAP process. And I see that we have a large amount of interest from people who would like to include EBA, but might not yet be doing so. That's fantastic. We'd love to hear from you to see how we can help make that happen. Wow, the vast majority of people not yet including EBA in the NAP process, and but interested in doing so. This would be great to see, Annika, how this dovetails with the work and the research that IISD that you've done through the NAP global program as well. I see a lot of people would like to include EBA in their processes. Fantastic. I'll just give a few more seconds for you to get in your last responses on this question. It's our last Menti question for you today, so you will not have to work anymore in this webinar. But that's great. Lots of interest in including EBA. And one response saying that you're not yet considering EBA in the NAP process, and hopefully we can move you into that pink category as well, where you are interested in doing so. I'd like to thank all of you for your responses on the Menti. It's very interesting for us to see and to learn that about our audience. And I'm going to just hand over and show you the last slides that we have. Hopefully you can now all see my screen once again. Now, before we hand over to Alejandro to take us more in depth on the guidelines, I'd just like to give a very brief introduction to the work of these guidelines and their objectives. These are meant to support countries in order to link their NAPs to ecosystem-based adaptation approaches. And as such, they support the work of the UNFCCC through its Least Developed Countries Expert Group, or the LEG, as it's commonly known. I love it when people have snappy acronyms. And these guidelines will be one of a series of supplementary guidelines that provide countries with more in-depth information on the NAP process on a very specific topic. These guidelines will be identifying entry points for EBA in the NAP process, and they'll be including numerous examples of the use of EBA in adaptation plans and development strategies, and they're really meant to provide practical recommendations for policymakers. So Ali, with that, I'm going to hand over to you.
Thank you very much, Liz. And thank you all for joining this webinar today. I'm going to just mention that we are working this project in coordination with UNDP, who is our main partner, and with the support of the FIBA working group, the Friends of EBA, in the formulation of these supplementary guidelines for integrating ecosystem-based adaptation in the NAP process. So in terms of contents, the guidelines aim at illustrating EBA as a natural vehicle to bring different stakeholders to the table as national adaptation processes allow for coordinating efforts on development and adaptation, including linkages and alignment with national development contexts, sustainable development goals, for example, national determined contributions, and others such as the same-day framework for disaster risk reduction, as has been mentioned by previous presenters. For this in this guideline, we suggest that to include EBA in the NAP process, we should refer and make visible the multiple benefits associated with ecosystem functions and services and how these have positive effects on health, disaster risk reduction, and current global challenges associated with biodiversity, land use change, and rampant urbanization in a warming planet. So in this slide that we have here, I want to stop for a few minutes in one of the core sections of the guidelines, in which we are identifying entry points, opportunities for integrating EBA in the NAP process, as well as challenges, and some of the information that countries may find useful when considering ecosystem approaches in their NAP process. So we also, in this core section and throughout the guidelines, we provide some examples to illustrate how some countries are making the best use of opportunities. At the time, they're also addressing some of the main challenges for considering EBA in their NAP processes. As many of you may know by being familiar with the NAP processes in your countries, a few years ago, the UNFCCC delivered a set of technical guidelines to assist countries in the formulation of their NAPs. That is the starting point of these supplementary guidelines. Although we're trying to simplify the original approach, bringing it down to three main stages, as you can see on this slide. We have the planning stage, which actually groups merges elements A and B of the UNFCCC technical guidelines. We have the implementation stage, and we have of the guidelines. And this in this core section, we review some of the activities as well that will most likely take place during each one of the stages of the NAP process and that are relevant for EBA, such as carrying out climate risk assessments or ecosystem services appraisals, raising awareness and building capacities on EBA, or, for example, monitoring the integration and the implementation of EBA through the different stages of the NAP process. Next slide, please. Yeah, for example, I just want to show you for a minute, in the planning stage of the NAP process, we may find interesting entry points for considering an EBA in policymaking processes during the formulation or during the revision of sectoral policies, sectoral budgets, sectoral plans and strategies. The planning of budgeting of these sectoral policies, for example, may be entry points for EBA. This planning stage could bring also the opportunity for informing economic sectors on ecosystems approaches to climate change adaptation, and also to address the challenges associated with generating an institutional enabling environment according to the national legislative framework and the different institutional mandates in the country. Key information at the planning stage for many countries will be, for example, having downscale climate change projections to fit into future environmental and socioeconomic scenarios. And for each one of these stages in the guidelines, we want to illustrate with an example. In this case, for the planning stage, we think that having these downscale climate change scenarios and projections are very, very important. And that's the work that is taking place right now in Iraq with a Green Climate Fund project in which UNEP and the Ministry of Health and Environment are developing downscale climate change projections and also climate risk assessments, which are considering ecosystems. And this will allow for focusing on vulnerable groups, engaging all institutions playing a part in the NAP. Next slide, please. We also may find some interesting entry points at the implementation stage of the NAP, in which we address, of course, in the guidance, we address the entry points, for example, municipal land use planning to go at a subnational level, but also the opportunities and the challenges of working in EBA, because EBA is cross-sectoral and cross-scalar. Working across scales always represents a challenge. And of course, for implementing EBA, we need to promote investments in EBA. So we need to know about the costs of the implementation of EBA options. We have a case study to illustrate this stage from Lam Town in the Fiji Islands, where ecosystem services benefits were calculated for coastal ecosystems and forests to guide decision-making on climate change adaptation. possible options for the land town based on the conclusions of the cost-benefit analysis will be to implement targeted engineering options, but as part of a general EBA approach. Next slide, please. We now get to the final stage of the map process, and we're explaining the guidelines that this review, during the review, we can integrate EBA as we update the map. We have opportunities as well and challenges. For example, the indicator systems that we must generate, make compatible, harmonize with different processes in the country. We may have also some information needs, which and we illustrate with the case study from Kiribati, in which they are updating their NAPs, integrating ecosystem approaches and gender in their improved revised NAP. So at the end of this review process, we have an improved NAP ready to go over the next planning session. So if we go to the next slide, I think that we are almost on time now. Just to mention in this timeline that in January, we will have a consultation on a general draft of the guidelines. And if possible, we would like to launch the guidelines at the PAN Forum in March 2021. This is, I think, is what I wanted to talk to you about. And now over to Liz. Thank you.
Thank you so much to Alejandro for that detailed description of the work that's being planned and has been done so far on these guidelines. I'd like to invite everyone listening in case you're not already familiar with the Friends of EBA, with FIBA, or involved in their working group that they've created to support these guidelines, to please get in touch with us and let us know if you're interested in contributing. Here on the screen, you can see a bit of information about the scope of the work that this working group will be carrying out. Primarily will be involved in soliciting and providing real examples and case studies, as well as tools for the guidelines. They'll also be doing a technical review of the guidelines, the groups that are involved in this working group, and help disseminate them to countries and to people such as all of you who might find them useful. So please do get involved and contribute and reach out to us. And with that, we have come to the end of our webinar time today. This hour has gone by very quickly for us, hopefully also for you. I'd like to thank all of our presenters and everyone for tuning in and for your interest in this work that we're doing. And as promised, I'm providing links on where you can get more information on the work that you've heard about today, including how to contact the individuals who presented. These links are live. And so if you've signed up for the webinar today, we're going to be sending you all of these slides along with a video recording of the webinar. And with that, I would like to say thank you very much. I wish you all a very good rest of your morning, afternoon, or evening, depending on where you are in the world. We do hope you'll join our next webinar. I invite you to keep an eye on our latest developments in the work involving EBA and NAPs by signing up to receive our regular updates through our GAN newsletter. All the best and goodbye.